want to start with something I have never said out loud, not because I didn't know it. I knew it. I knew it every morning I woke up and didn't move. I knew it every time someone pushed me and I let it slide past. I knew it every time I said tomorrow and believed the lie before I even finished saying it. I was weak, not the kind of weak that looks dramatic, not the kind that breaks things or screams or makes a scene people remember, the quiet kind. The kind that smiles in the right places, says the right words, comes home, stares at the ceiling, and does absolutely nothing about any of it. That's the kind nobody names, because it's invisible from the outside. Because it functions, it shows up, it passes. I was weak in quiet places, weak when I was alone, weak in decisions nobody else could see, and I knew it. That was the worst part. Not confusion, not ignorance, awareness. And here's the part nobody talks about. People think weakness feels like pain. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes weakness feels comfortable. It whispers, it negotiates, it gives you permission. Tomorrow, later, not now. Small words, tiny lies, the kind that don't sound dangerous until years disappear. Because here is what I couldn't escape. You can forgive yourself for not knowing better. You cannot forgive yourself for knowing exactly, for seeing it clearly, precisely, without any shadow of confusion, and still choosing the couch. The excuse, the easier version of everything, that's not weakness anymore. That's something harder to name and much harder to carry. I was weak. I knew it. I did nothing. That confession doesn't feel good to say. It shouldn't. It is a cold, heavy stone that sits in the stomach of anyone who has ever looked at their own reflection and realized they are the problem in their own story. Stay with me, because this next part is the one that will hurt. Let me describe something to you. I want you to notice, not think. Notice if anything sounds familiar, not failing dramatically. That is the trap. Dramatic failure is easy to locate. You can point at it, explain it, hand it to people in a sentence. This is different. You are functioning. You pay bills, mostly. You respond when people reach out. You eat. You sleep. You do what the day requires, and then you do it again. From the outside, nothing is wrong. But inside, somewhere you have quietly stopped checking, there is a version of you that remembers. It remembers what you said you were going to do 3 years ago. Maybe 5, maybe more. Maybe you've stopped counting because counting hurts. That thing you said you were going to build. That standard you swore to yourself you would hold. That version of your life that was always 1 month away from beginning. You haven't forgotten it, and forgetting would have been mercy. You remember it perfectly. The clarity you had, the conviction in your chest when you said it, the specific moment, you can still locate it if you try, where you looked at yourself and said, "This changes now." And then it didn't, and you didn't collapse. You didn't hit a wall. You just adjusted, quickly lowered the ceiling, told yourself it wasn't that important anyway, found people who had also lowered theirs, and called that belonging. That's not failure. That's resignation wearing the face of acceptance. I need you to be honest with yourself for the next 30 seconds. When did it start? Not when things got bad. Earlier, because weakness rarely arrives loudly. Maybe it started the first time you ignored your own word. You said you'd wake up early. You didn't. You said you'd train. You didn't. You said you'd start. You didn't. Not because you couldn't, because you didn't. Tiny betrayal. Tiny fracture. Tiny crack, then another. Then another. Because identity isn't built from giant moments. Identity is repetition. Identity is evidence. Identity is memory. And your mind remembers everything. Even things you pretend not to notice, especially those. Every promise you broke to yourself stayed somewhere. You thought it disappeared. It didn't. You think confidence vanishes randomly? No. Confidence is evidence. Confidence says, I have seen myself follow through before. But what happens when the memory shows something else? What happens when every internal file says he quits, he delays, he hides? You stop trusting yourself, not suddenly, quietly, slowly. Then one day you realize something terrifying. You believe strangers more than you believe yourself, because strangers haven't watched you fail yourself repeatedly. You have. The thing I'm about to name, you already know it. That's why it stings. Here's what the knowing does to you over time. It doesn't sit still. It doesn't fade. It comes with you, into every room, into every conversation, into every quiet moment where there is nothing to distract from it. When someone speaks with real confidence, not performance, real confidence, the kind that comes from having done the hard thing, you flinch, just slightly, just for a moment, because something in you measures the distance between where you are and where you were supposed to be. When someone your age achieves something, there is a second Just 1 second, before the congratulations where something cold moves through you. Not jealousy. Worse than jealousy, recognition. That could have been a version of me. Not envy. Not bitterness, just a quiet, precise acknowledgement that you had the same starting point, the same raw material, and you chose differently. And then you close the tab, literally or mentally, and you move on, because that is what you do now. You move on, quickly, before the feeling lands fully. That's the cost nobody talks about. Not the time lost, not the opportunities passed. The cost is who you become when you carry awareness of your own weakness and stay silent about it. Year after year, season after season, you become careful with your ambitions. You stop announcing things because you know your own track record. Careful with your conversations. You stay surface level because going deeper means being asked questions you cannot answer honestly. Careful with yourself. You stop examining too closely because every honest look leads somewhere you have trained yourself not to go. Careful is another word for shrinking, and most men never notice they are smaller than they were. This is where most people stop listening. Don't, because carrying weakness has physical weight. Nobody says that, but you feel it. You wake up tired. Not body tired, soul tired, decision tired, existence tired. You procrastinate things that take 5 minutes. You avoid calls. You avoid mirrors. You avoid silence because silence gets dangerous. Silence lets thoughts speak, and thoughts remember. Thoughts say, you know what you're doing. Thoughts say, you've seen this before. Thoughts say, again? That is why distractions become addictions. That is why noise becomes necessary. That is why constant stimulation feels like comfort, because stillness exposes things, and exposure hurts. Weakness loves noise, because noise keeps truth at a distance. The energy it takes to maintain all of this, to hold the awareness of your own weakness while performing normalcy over the top of it, that is an invisible tax. You are tired in a way that sleep does not fix. You rest and wake up exhausted. You do less than you are capable of and still feel drained. That is not laziness. That is the weight of who you have been refusing to line up with, who you said you would become, and that weight compounds. Every day of knowing without moving, it adds. Every year that passes with the same awareness and the same stillness, it multiplies. I was weak. I knew it. I did nothing. You've heard everything I've said before. You haven't heard this, you weren't lazy. Not exactly. Lazy is too generous. Lazy sounds passive. This wasn't passive. This was participation. You participated in your own decline. You watched, you knew. You signed off on it every day. Again and again and again. That is not laziness. That is surrender with better branding. Read that again in your head, surrender. With better branding, because we create beautiful language around ugly behavior. I'm overwhelmed. I'm finding myself. I'm waiting for clarity. Sometimes that's true. Other times, you are hiding. Other times you are scared. Other times you are protecting comfort, because comfort has strange rules. Comfort asks for very little. Just your standards, just your future, just your potential, nothing major. Just everything. Weak men preserve comfort. Strong men preserve standards. One protects feelings. One protects identity. Sit with what I just said. Don't move past it yet. I became an expert at looking busy while accomplishing absolutely nothing. I organized my desk, changed my schedule, planned my routine, researched my goals. I was doing everything except the actual painful work required to change my reality. It was a beautiful masquerade of self-improvement designed to hide a decaying core. I was not failing dramatically. I was performing progress in a language nobody could verify. And the worst part about knowing you are weak is that you become your own jailer. You don't need anyone to tell you that you are failing. The voice inside your head is already doing it with surgical precision. You start to despise the sound of your own promises because you know they carry zero weight. Every time you say tomorrow, a small piece of your self-respect dies in its sleep. Eventually, you stop making the promises. You accept mediocrity as if it were a life sentence handed down by a judge, forgetting that you are the one holding the keys to the cell. Most men skip past this part. That's exactly why nothing changes. Because one day something happened, not dramatic. No music, no speech, no transformation scene, just exhaustion. I got tired, not tired of pain, tired of permission, tired of excuses, tired of hearing my own voice negotiate every single morning. Because weakness negotiates. Always. Take today off. Start Monday. You deserve rest. Again, again, again. And eventually I realized something. I was not losing battles. I was not fighting them. Massive difference. You cannot lose a war you never entered. And I never entered, I watched. I observed. I waited while life moved without asking my permission. Then the night came where the illusion broke. It was not a grand revelation. It was just a realization of how heavy my own skin felt. I realized that if I died that night, the summary of my existence would be that I was a consumer of other people's courage. I had contributed nothing to the world except my own complaints about how hard it was to exist. That is a specific kind of grief that has no name. It is the mourning of a version of yourself that never got to be born. You are carrying the corpse of your potential every single day, and the smell of it is infecting everything you touch, your work, your thoughts, the way you love. What I'm about to say will make you uncomfortable. Good, because here is what I finally understood. Weakness isn't failing. Weakness is watching yourself fail and becoming familiar with it. That is the poison. Familiarity. You become roommates with disappointment. You know where it sits. You know how it sounds. You know when it arrives. Then one day disappointment stops shocking you. And that is the day to be afraid of, not today. That day, the one where nothing stings anymore. When pain stops disturbing you. When failure stops bothering you. When drifting stops scaring you. Something inside you has adjusted to decay. I need you here for this part. Maybe that is where you are now. Not destroyed, not hopeless, not ruined. Adjusted to less, adjusted to average, adjusted to waiting, adjusted to weakness. And maybe nobody around you notices. Maybe you are functioning, maybe you are smiling, maybe you are productive enough to survive, not enough to become. Weak men survive, strong men become. One avoids collapse, one builds identity. You already know which sentence describes you right now. I need you to be honest with yourself for the next 30 seconds. Here is what I eventually understood. Late. Much later than I should have. Knowing is not the same as deciding. You have spent years treating them like the same thing. You think because you can see the weakness clearly, because you can articulate it, feel it, describe it, that counts as something. It doesn't. Awareness is not action. Self-awareness is not growth. Knowing is not moving. They have never been the same thing, which makes this the third layer of the problem. You know you are weak. You know that knowing is not enough, and you still have not moved. I was weak. I knew it. I did nothing. Every day you do nothing is not neutral, not staying still. You are falling behind yourself. The version of you that could have existed, the one you can still picture when you are honest, that version is not waiting. That version moved on without you. Do not look away from this screen. This is your life we are dissecting. You have trained your brain to seek comfort. And breaking that programming will feel like breaking a bone. You will have to endure days where you feel completely incompetent. You will have to face the fact that you are years behind where you started. You will have to swallow your pride and do tasks that feel beneath the grand vision you have of yourself. Weak men demand respect before they have proven their value. Strong men earn it through the dirt. There is no montage. There is no swelling music. There is just you, a clock that does not stop ticking, and a choice that must be made every 10 seconds. Pain of discipline or pain of regret. Both options hurt. Choose your poison. But do not pretend choosing nothing is a safe third option. Choosing nothing is choosing regret by default. And here is the part where the mirror cracks. I am going to ask something of you now. Not motivation, not effort, something quieter. You have been carrying the knowing like a debt you are ashamed of, something to conceal, something to manage in private in the margins of your actual life. You have built your days in the shape of a man who has something to hide from himself. That is not carrying. That is concealing. And concealing it has cost you more than the weakness itself ever did. What I am asking is this, at minimum, at the absolute minimum to yourself, let it be known, without softening the language, without the performance of self-awareness that protects you from the actual sting of it. I was weak, I knew it, I did nothing. Say that, not to anyone else, to yourself. In whatever silence belongs to you, say it like it is true, because it is. Feel what comes after saying it honestly, because what lands can be picked up. What's floating just drifts, and then, and this is the only instruction that matters, do one thing, not a plan, not a transformation, not a full overhaul, one thing. The smallest possible action that proves the sentence has changed tense. That's it. Stay with me. Because this is the part where it turns, because if you participated in becoming weak, then participation works both ways. The admission of weakness is not a life sentence, it is a diagnosis. You cannot fix a leak if you refuse to admit the basement is flooding. You cannot build on a foundation of sand and pretend it is granite. The moment you say those words, not with self-pity, but with cold surgical accuracy, The spell breaks. You take the power away from the secret. You stop pretending you are just unlucky or misunderstood. You accept the absolute worst version of who you have become so you can finally start the excavation. I had to surrender. I had to drop the pride that told me I was special. I had to accept that I was just another man who had fallen into the trap of modern comfort. And from that place of total submission, I started to lift the first small weight. Not a transformation, not a revolution. I just tried to win the first hour, then the second, then the third. When I lost the fourth, I didn't give up on the day. I reset and tried to win the fifth, inch by inch, in the dirt, away from the eyes of the world. The slow, unsexy process of becoming someone who can be trusted by his own mind. I started this by telling you something I had never said out loud. I was weak. I knew it. I did nothing. That sentence lived in me for years. Not because it wasn't true, because saying it meant deciding what came after it. And for a long time, I didn't want to decide. Deciding meant no more waiting. Deciding meant owning the years. All of them, without exception. Deciding meant the next thing I did would have to mean something. You are not your worst years. But you are not separate from them either. They happened. You were there. You watched and you are still here. That is not comfort. That is not resolution. It is simply the truth of where everything begins. Not with the feeling of being ready. Not with the guilt having cleared. Not with the past having made sense. With one sentence spoken honestly, I was weak. I knew it. I did nothing. And then, one breath after that, not anymore.